Okay, so let's try and unpack this. When you hear the name Nostradamus, I mean, your mind immediately goes to what? Global doom? Future pandemics?
Cryptic predictions, yeah.
Right, cryptic predictions about world leaders, if a comet flies past or some disaster strikes, someone, somewhere will inevitably bring up Nostradamus.
Well, the thing is that popular image, the robed mystic staring into a crystal ball, that's almost entirely a myth. Our deep dive today, it really reveals a savvy, highly educated Renaissance author.
And a physician.
A physician, an astrologer, yeah. His life was so much more turbulent and, frankly, more interesting than the legend suggests.
Exactly. And that's our mission today. We want to give you a shortcut, really, to cutting through centuries of myth. We're going to look at the actual sources, his documented life, his work as a pretty respected healer, and the academic reality of his famous quatrains. We want you to walk away from this understanding why his reputation persists today, even though the scholarly consensus is pretty firmly against any actual prophecy.
Right. And to set the scene, you have to remember his lifespan. 1503 to 1566. He's firmly rooted in 16th century Europe.
Yeah.
And his documented jobs were physician, apothecary, and astrological consultant. He wasn't some hermit on a mountaintop. He was a busy, connected, professional man.
So let's start with some of those surprising details, the man behind the prophecies. I mean, you look at his family history, and there's this immediate layer of complexity. His father's family, they were originally Jewish.
That's right. They converted to Catholic Christianity about a generation before Nostradamus was born. So he was born into a relatively new Christian context.
And his education was, well, chaotic seems like the right word. It was really defined by the biggest fear of that era, right? The plague.
Absolutely. He tried to start his studies at the University of Avignon, but the university literally closed down. He was forced to leave after just over a year because of a huge outbreak.
But the more famous incident, that happened later. In 1529, he enters the prestigious University of Montpellier, hoping to earn a medical doctorate. He should have been on track for this brilliant career, but he was almost immediately expelled. So why? Why was a man so famous for healing actually expelled from medical school?
It's a fantastic historical detail. It tells you so much about the hierarchy of the time. He was expelled because he had worked as an apothecary.
Which is like a pharmacist today.
Basically, yeah. Someone who prepared and sold medicines. And the university statutes strictly forbade anyone who had practiced a manual trade from earning a medical degree.
A manual trade?
Yes, medicine was considered a liberal art, for gentlemen, dispensing medications with your own hands. That was manual labor. The faculty, well, they thought he was beneath them.
So the very skills that would later make him famous, his hands-on knowledge of herbs and compounding, that's what got him kicked out of high academia. That is a fantastic irony.
It truly is. And his failure in formal academia, that really became his success in the real world. He went on to spend years traveling, acting as a frontline medical responder, specifically tackling plague outbreaks in places like Marseille, Salon de Provence.
And this is where the famous rose pill comes in, right?
Exactly. This pill, which he made himself, was his big claim to fame as a healer. It was a mix of rose petals, cypress, iris, a few other things. Now, we know it wasn't a cure.
Of course not.
But it was a brilliant marketing moment for him. It really established his reputation.
He gained a lot of notoriety for his bravery, for being willing to treat the sick. But the sources also highlight this immense personal tragedy that proves he wasn't immune to the horror.
No, not at all. His first wife and his 2 young children died around 1534. It was almost certainly the very plague he was fighting. It grounds his life in the devastating reality of the 16th century.
And yet, despite that loss, he was incredibly resilient and professionally successful. By the mid-1550s, he'd secured a patron who basically ended his financial worries for good.
Catherine de Medici.
The Queen of France.
The Queen of France, wife of King Henry II. She was deeply interested in astrology, and she sought out Nostradamus' advice. By the time he died, he'd been elevated to counselor and physician in ordinary to her son, King Charles IX. He finished his life right at the center of power in Europe.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. How does this controversial yet well-connected physician write a book of long-term prophecies that we are still debating today? What was the motive, literary or financial?
Well, we have to distinguish between his published works, because during his lifetime, he was mostly known for his annual publications, the almanacs, the prognostications, and the presages.
So like a farmer's almanac today.
Very similar, yes. These were immensely popular, sold widely, and they were his guaranteed cash cow every year. The sources confirm he published these annually from 1550 right up until his death. In total, he compiled at least 6,338 short-dated predictions in them.
And then there was the big one, the Legacy Project, Les Prophéties.
That's the one. The book of 942 poetic quatrains, organized into centuries. And this offered vague, long-term doom, not the dated weather forecasts and political rumors you'd find in the almanacs.
And he also published medical books, right?
He did. A book on cosmetics, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And one detailing his plague treatments, which, it's worth noting, included things like bloodletting that we now know were completely ineffective. He was an author across many genres. But the prophecies, they paid the bills.
Let's get into the mechanics of those prophecies. He claimed to use something called judicial astrology. What exactly was that, and was he any good at it?
So judicial astrology was the practice of interpreting celestial events to predict future earthly events, wars, plagues, the fate of kings. In the 16th century, this was often seen as a legitimate intellectual pursuit.
Right.
But other professional astrologers, his own contemporaries, they often criticized Nostradamus. They accused him of being incompetent at calculating charts and making just blatant mathematical errors.
So the very basis of his calculations was flawed. And when we look at the actual content, it wasn't original either. Academic researchers found he wasn't inventing this stuff, he was synthesizing it.
Exactly. The quatrains heavily paraphrase older, existing collections of apocalyptic and end-of-the-world prophecies.
Like what? What was he reading?
One of his main sources was a very popular book from 1522 called the Mirabilis Liber, the Marvelous Book. It was basically a compilation of medieval prophecies. He also borrowed heavily from classical historians like Livy and Plutarch.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this technique of heavy borrowing, it means he wasn't predicting the future so much as he was remixing the past.
He was remixing public fear, specifically fears of the Ottoman invasion, religious upheaval, and the impending arrival of the Antichrist. All themes lifted directly from his source material.
And this is where his skill as a writer comes in, to hide his borrowing, and I assume to protect himself from religious scrutiny. I mean, prophesying had to be dangerous work back then.
Extremely dangerous. So he deliberately used convoluted language. He employed what scholars call Virgilianized syntax.
Can you break that down for us? Virgilianized syntax.
Absolutely. It just means flowery, confusing, overly Latinate sentence structures that are incredibly hard to pin down. He used word games, anagrams. He mixed in Latin, Greek, and Italian. He made the poems intentionally ambiguous so they couldn't be used to prosecute him as a heretic or a false prophet.
And this is maybe the most critical point that gets missed today. Nostradamus himself. He repeatedly rejected the label prophet.
He did, explicitly. He said he would not attribute to himself a title of such lofty sublimity. He claimed he was just assessing events based on his sources and his astrology, not claiming direct divine powers. He was a fortune teller, not a seer.
Which means the vagueness was the point.
The vagueness was everything. It meant the quatrains predict generalized disasters, plagues, famines, floods that have been part of human history forever. The very vagueness that protected him then is what allows his works to persist now.
Okay, so we have to address the claims that fuel his modern reputation. The claims that he predicted the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, or the rises of figures like Napoleon and Hitler.
Yes. The Hitler one is the perfect example of how details get twisted. In several quatrains, popular interpreters claim he mentions the word Hister as a clear reference to Hitler.
Right.
But if you look at his actual writings, like the Presage for 1554, he very clearly used Hister as the classical name for the lower Danube River. The connection to the German dictator is entirely manufactured after the fact. It's what we call
Retroactive clairvoyance. That's the academic term for it, right? So if the predictions are that vague, what's the explanation for why people believe them so fiercely?
Academics call it post-diction. Nostradamus' reputation is sustained because his quatrains are vague, they're undated, and they're completely open to interpretation. It makes it easy for modern supporters to fit them to major world events after they happen.
So 9/11, the Apollo moon landing, the death of a major political figure.
Anything. Someone will always find a stanza that seems to fit if they squint hard enough.
And this whole problem is made worse by translation bias. I mean, researchers have been absolutely scathing about how the quatrains get presented to English-speaking audiences.
Indeed. We know that almost all popular English translations are of extremely poor quality. They show very little understanding of 16th century French. And worst of all, they're often intentionally altered to make the quatrains fit whatever event the translator thinks they refer to.
So in many cases, you're not even reading Nostradamus, you're reading the translator's fan fiction.
In a way, yes. You're reading their interpretation, not his original convoluted text.
Which means the final academic judgment is pretty damning. No Nostradamus quatrain is known to have been correctly interpreted as predicting a specific event before it happened other than in vague terms that could apply to anything.
And we have fascinating documentation of how his work has been actively manipulated for political ends. You just have to look at the dramatic example of his use during World War II.
Wait, Goebbels was literally manufacturing Nostradamus verses. Tell us about that.
It's incredible. Both Nazi Germany and the Allies used falsified verses for propaganda. The Nazis, led by propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, realized the persuasive power of ancient prophecy. They had their own astrologers like Karl Ernst Kraft produced propaganda booklets featuring completely fake, frightening verses.
The audacity of it is what sticks with you. The sources show that Goebbels himself wrote a fake prophecy that German planes then airdropped over occupied Europe, and that fake prophecy specifically described a crooked cross triumphing and engulfing London and Paris in fire.
That is the perfect illustration. The prophecy didn't come from a mystic in the 16th century. It came from a propaganda minister in the 20th. The power of Nostradamus lies not in his sight of the future, but in the malleability of his deliberately vague language. It's a political and commercial tool.
So, to synthesize all this, what we've learned is that Nostradamus was a brilliant, highly educated Renaissance author, a physician, and an astute businessman. He mastered the art of literary borrowing and intentionally obscure language.
And he created works that perfectly resonated with the profound public fears of his time, all while explicitly denying he was a prophet.
The core takeaway is that he was a savvy author who knew his market. He blended history, flawed astrology, and existing apocalyptic fears into this compelling, endlessly reinterpretable package.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for us today? The enduring power of Nostradamus, it isn't really about predicting the future. It's about the human desire to find patterns, to find certainty and meaning in the chaos of the past and the present. It's an urge for structure.
And this raises one last important question for you to mull over. Nostradamus himself stated that his prophecies extend from now to the year 3797. Now, given that one of his key sources, the writer Richard Rousseau, proposed the world might end much sooner in 2242, what stands out to you about Nostradamus' decision to push that end date more than 1,500 years further into the future? Was that the seer extending his visions, or was it the savvy author trying to extend the shelf life of his book for millennia? Something to think about.